Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Blue Feathered Stories. I'm your host, Blue Thunderbird Woman. Welcome. I can't believe it. It's already May. It seems like it was just yesterday I started this new podcast, wanting to share stories about my healing journey and the many encounters that I've had with synchronicities and spirit. It really just seems like yesterday. But ever since this COVID-19 pandemic isolation, time has just seemed to have gone into some sort of warp speed. I don't even know how to explain it really, but it feels like some sort of alter reality of some sort. In today's episode, I want to talk about what happens when spirit is silent. Yeah, when spirit is silent and there doesn't seem to be any synchronicities or connections. What happens when it goes silent? And what I'm about to share with you today is something very personal. Well, everything I've shared with you is quite personal. It is my healing story. It is my truth. It is what has happened to me. And so as I share this particular time in my life, I want you to understand that I don't claim to understand those who walk through a similar path. I simply have a wish to share in order for maybe someone will find one of whoever is listening, may find some truth or some aha, may resonate. May even possibly my story might trigger something. And I would ask you to observe that and sit with that and reflect upon the trigger. About 4 weeks ago, not long after we went into isolation, physical separation, there was a couple of days where I tapped into this very specific energy, it was not the pandemic fear energy. It had a different signature to it. And the energy was that of domestic violence, domestic abuse, child abuse, if you will, even. And it really hit me quite profoundly. There was about 2 or 3 days where I was sitting within this energy going, wow, what is this? And I remember reflecting on, this whole propaganda marketing thing about the frontliners and how there are heroes. And I find it interesting that as a human race, we always need to find heroes and heroines within the stories. And I'm not at all criticizing the importance of the doctors and the nurses and those that are working in the food industry and the grocery stores, those that are being more subjected to the virus than the rest of us. I'm not at all criticizing that. But there's a whole other kind of hero, if you want, that's happening behind closed doors. And I don't think we really know it or realize it unless we've had some sort of similar life experience around that. And that is, imagine living with a partner or a parent who is of the characteristic of an abuser. And during this heightened time of fear and being locked in isolation, we are completely subjected to their anger and their fear. And that the only way they know how to express that and deal with that is through an outward lashing of sorts to the people who are in the same household. That is the energy that I tapped into. And it made me reflect that the heroes are those young children who are in that energy 24/7. Because when life was quote unquote normal, the children who went to school had a break from that life. And the abused partner also had a break, perhaps when one or the other or both went to work. And now they find themselves together under the same roof for 24 hours a day in this constant fear, struggle, anger, hopelessness, out of control energy. That's an energy I tapped into for several days. And it brought up all kinds of memories for me. I have huge compassion for those who find themselves in that kind of unhealthy situation. Because I too have had, I speak in past tense, I have had that experience. And then it made me reflect even further. When we talk about divine and God and angels and power animals and protectors, where are they during those really difficult times? Where are they? Because I can tell you from my memory and my experiences, I didn't feel they existed at all. And so, where are they? Or where were they in my case? So I'm going to share my personal story around domestic abuse. And we're going to look at where was spirit during this time. And I want you to know that it is my story. It is my truth. I'm not here to compare myself to others' situations. We all have our separate, unique truths. We all have our own belief systems around what we've experienced or what we are currently experiencing. But I'm happy to share my own story. And perhaps it may give you some hope. Perhaps it won't. Either way, I'm here to share, and it goes something like this. When I was a young girl, I was molested. I was very young, 5. And that experience in the mind of a 5-year-old was pretty much guilt and shame around that. When I got a little bit older as a teenager, I was really becoming a woman. I had another small incident. And again, I felt disgusted. I felt shame. And I really was quite grossed out by the experience. I was bullied as a young girl. And by the time I reached the age of 17, I was very unhappy. I did not believe in God. In fact, I would have considered myself an atheist. Didn't believe in anything. And I was very depressed. And so I tried to commit suicide. That didn't work. I eventually sort of crawled out of that black hole. And then in my early 20s, as I was in my 4th year of university, I was so tired of making ends meet, putting myself through school, living alone, holding 4 part-time jobs to pay the rent. I desperately wanted to be saved. I was tired of being independent, and I just wanted someone to take care of me. And as they say, my wish is your command. This knight shining armor came to my rescue. And he wanted to take care of me. He wanted to help me go through school. He was just magnificent. And so I was in a place where I wanted that to happen. I moved in with him. And as our relationship developed, there were more and more signs, these bells, if you want, that would go off and say, something's not right with this person. But I ignored them because I was attached to the dream of being saved by a savior. I was attached to the dream that I could let someone else take care of me and my needs. And so the relationship continued on its unhealthy path. And I recognized that I would label it abuse. It was never physical abuse, it was mental abuse. I could not do anything right. I was, considered lesser than. I was told I was no good, that I was ugly, that nobody could love me. Eventually, my family was separated from me. I was really isolated. Yeah, very isolated. And I remember at some point in that relationship, I became extremely dependent. I had no money. I was going to school. And I was kind of put myself in this position that I couldn't leave. I had nothing to survive on. And I started to become very dead inside. My hair started to fall out. I lost a lot of weight. It was really hard for me to concentrate at university. I was always afraid to go back. Sometimes I wasn't even allowed to go to class because I would be accused of having an affair with some student in the classroom. And once in a while, my partner would show up to check on me because he didn't trust me. And so it became very much like a prison. And I remember at some point in the relationship that I vowed, I created this boundary that if he ever hit me, I would leave. Yeah, if he ever hit me, I would leave. And he never did. 6 months went by, 7 months went by, 8 months went by. He would hit everything else around me. He would put a hole in the wall. He would break something in the house. He would headbutt the truck side. He did some really strange things. He has so much anger pent up in him. And when you're in that kind of relationship, you realize at some point that it's not anger towards you, it's their own internal war that's going on. And there's really nothing you can do to help them. But I don't know that you get that, really, when you're in the midst of that kind of relationship. So when I reflect back at that time, I think to myself, where was Spirit? Where was God? Where was the divine? Where was Mother Mary? Where was my guide during this dark, dark time? Where were they? And I don't even know that I would have consciously even thought about it at that time. Because really, when you're living in that kind of condition, you are in complete reptilian brain mode of survival. 24/7, you are exhausted because you're constantly walking on eggshells. You're constantly have the eyes behind your back to make sure that you're not going to be attacked in the middle of the night. You don't even sleep because you're not even sure if you're going to wake up the next day. So who has time to think about where God is or Spirit is during those dark times? Is it even possible that we are completely 100% disconnected from Spirit during those dark times? Is it part of our necessary lesson we're supposed to learn through this experience? What really goes on during that time? And I've been really made to reflect on that recently because I can feel the energy out there of those that are currently living with someone who is abusive, who's not respecting themselves and the others living within their family household. Yeah, where's Spirit during those dark times? I know that when I reflect upon it now, I feel, I have different insight on it, obviously now, because I'm no longer living in that. And I have spent a good portion of my journey healing that really deep wound that occurred in that experience. But what I do know is in the midst of that darkness, I remember putting out some sort of a prayer or an invitation asking to be physically hurt. I wanted to get hit because I had made it clear and I had set that boundary that if I was ever hit, that I would walk. And I desperately wanted to walk, but I didn't know how. And so, maybe in a really weird roundabout way, Spirit heard me because eventually, a year into the relationship, I was hit. We were at a party and it was bad. It was in January, it was -30 outside. And it was so hard for me to be in a group of friends and acquaintances because if I had a conversation or if a man spoke to me, I was accused of sleeping with them. So it was always so very uncomfortable because no matter what I said or did or denied or whatever, didn't matter. I was always being accused of doing something that wasn't true. And at some point we left and we could not get our truck started, so we had to walk home. It was a party. I was dressed in fashion boots and a small coat and gloves. I was not dressed for -30-degree weather, and we walked probably about 10 blocks. That might be equivalent to a good 1.5 miles. maybe 2 miles, in minus 30-degree weather at 3 o'clock in the morning. By the time we had reached home, I couldn't feel my toes. But before we reached home, he hit me. We just walked outside of the party, and he lost it. He accused me of all kinds of things, called me all kinds of names. And then he approached me and he hit me, not with his hands, but with his head. It was a headbutt. He was a boxer. And he knew where to hit me. He hit me in the temple. I was so fortunate to have not died right there at that moment. But as we walked home, all that I could think about was, I don't know if I'm going to live to breathe another day. Is there more that's coming? We eventually made it home, and I couldn't feel my toes. I was having hypothermia. He just went to bed and passed out, and I was left to compose myself and gather my pieces as my soul essences left me that night. They were too afraid to stick around. Can't say that I blame them. Yeah. And so Spirit heard me. I got hit. Physically was hit. And that night we had a dog, and I was so cold. I was shaking uncontrollably. I knew that I was having hypothermia and I was in shock. So I ran myself a warm bath and I soaked myself in the bathtub to try to get rid of my chills. And then eventually I crawled into bed with 1,000 covers on me, and the dog came and laid beside me to give me warmth so that I would stop shivering. She'd never done that before. She never slept with me before. And here she was, completely glued to my side, making sure that I would make it through the night. So was Spirit coming to me in the form of a dog that night? Did Spirit come to me through answering my call to be hit? Well, at the time, I wouldn't necessarily have thought so, because I was in survival mode. But when I reflect on it now, I would say yes, definitely. Definitely. When I woke up in the morning, I had this huge, massive bruise on my face. My whole eye had swollen shut. It was all black and blue. And when my partner looked at me in the morning, you could see the remorse of what had happened. And that was always the good part of the relationship. In the cycle of abuse, they go through what's called a honeymoon phase, and that's the part you fall in love with, you know? And he was sorry, very sorry. And he would just dote over me in his remorse. But when Monday came along, he didn't go to work. We didn't speak about it, but he remembered that I had said, if you ever hit me, I will leave you. And so for 2 days, he stayed home with me. He called in sick. He wanted to make sure that I would not leave him. And on the 3rd day, when he finally went to work, I reached out and I called the abuse hotline. And I remember having a conversation with the woman who answered. And I was convincing myself that it was okay to stay. And I remember her asking me and saying, do you think that it will ever happen again? Do you believe that he is capable of changing right now, right here? Do you believe that it will happen again? And I knew deep in my heart deep in my gut that it would only get worse. So they sent me a cab. I packed my toothbrush and I left. I was on my way to a shelter for abused women. And that was my escape. Yeah. So where was spirit during all those times? Again, you're in survival mode. You're flighting, right? You're escaping. You're not fighting. I could not fight. This man was strong. I couldn't fight him. I could leave and I could disappear off the map so that he could not find me. So the synchronicities are, I did ask to be hit. It happened. The dog did save me that night from hypothermia and from shock. No question about it. For whatever reason, I didn't get hit again in the subsequent days because we were in the honeymoon phase. Whatever reason, the woman who answered the phone on that 1-800 line that day, she knew to ask the right questions, and I was able to listen. That cab driver that came that day, yeah, he was the guy, he was the knight on the white horse, the knight that was saving me, taking me away from that relationship. The many women and counselors who worked at the abusive shelter center for women, they were my heroes. They were incredible. They knew what to say. They knew how to help. That difficult conversation that I had to do when I had to call my parents to let them know what was happening and where I was. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not sure what their reaction was after I hung up with them, but I can tell you that they were cool, calm, and supportive. And everything that happened afterwards, from gathering my stuff from the house several weeks later, I didn't have much, but I had some things that I wasn't willing to part with, to having the police escort me into the house to make sure that there wasn't any issues with me retrieving my belongings, with having my uncle come and help me, using a van to help me take my stuff out of the house. Yeah, those were all beautiful earth angels that came to assist me. I had so much support from my family and from my friends with those who I had shared. All of the right events took place. I had an opportunity to stay with a woman who had been through similar things, and I got to stay with them for a few weeks. Again, I was in hiding. I did not want to be found by my ex. Then I had the opportunity to stay for a few months and house sit for a friend's parents. Again, I wasn't able to be found. All of the right situations arose in order for me to heal, you know? So yeah, spirit didn't feel like it was there during those dark, dark times living in that experience. But when I asked for help, it came. Someone heard me. It all came. And as much as it was uncomfortable, difficult, terrifying, it was there. But again, you know, when you go through that, when you're living through that, it's hard to see that. It truly is hard to see because you're always in survival mode. You're in that primitive survival mode. You're not in a spiritual mode. Not that you're aware of anyways. Not for me at all. It was all about physical safety. along with my mental health. Yeah, definitely. The road to recovery. Oh, I tell you, when we have these really intense life experiences, the recovery period can be 10 times, 15 times longer than the actual event. It's really crazy when you compare time frames from the trauma to the healing part. They don't match up at all. They're not equivalent, not in my case in any ways. But the road to recovery for me from that traumatic experience of being abused in a relationship was a real difficult one. And I have, in that process of healing, there are so many bits and pieces that occurred throughout the years that I was given, a little bit here to heal. And then that rested for a while, and then something else would arise, and then I had to do some more healing around that trauma, and then it would rest, and then later on something else would arise, and then here we go again. Always revisiting and learning from that experience and healing that. And I think it's important to understand that when we embark on our healing journey and that spiritual journey, it's not like taking a pill and then, healing immediately. It's in little increments, bits and pieces. It's not something that happens, again, this is my truth. It's not anything that happens all at once. And if it has happened all at once for you, kudos. I'd love to hear about it. But it certainly wasn't the case for me. So once I was safe and I started to do the work of really understanding the trauma and the experience that I had witnessed and lived with, then the healing really, really began. And at first the healing is around the person, the person who has hurt you. That's where the healing tends to be focused on. There was a book that came my way, and it was called You Can Heal Your Life, Louise Hay. And then there was another book that came my way, and it was Excuse Me, Your Life is Waiting for You. And that was from Lynn Greyhorn. Two books that were really instrumental in waking me up more to my spiritualness, my spiritual body, and helping me with the understanding of the trauma that I had experienced. And back then, I remember having to do this exercise where you see yourself on stage with the person who has hurt you, and you forgive them. Well, the first time I tried to do that imagery, I could see him on stage, but I couldn't even go walk on the stage. And then the second time I tried, we were both on stage, but that's as far as it went. And then the third time I tried that, I could see myself extending a hand. And so in order to bring forgiveness, and then eventually as I tried and tried and tried again, I could see myself hugging this person and forgiving them. But, forgiveness is changing the energy around something, right? It's really changing the energy around something. And what I learned during that time of that piece of healing for me was that even though it had been 10 years since I had left that relationship, was already in a new relationship and married to a wonderful man, I was still imprisoned by the fear, that darkness, that blaming, that victimization, all of those low vibrational energy frequencies, if you will. I was still a prisoner of all of that for many, many years after I was no longer physically with them. And when I finally came with that aha moment, I realized that needed to be healed, that I needed to shift that. I mean, he was off having a great life. He'd had other girlfriends. I think he married eventually and had a child. I mean, he wasn't busy thinking about me anymore. He wasn't around lurking around the corner waiting to pounce on me. He was no longer that tiger for me. Oh no, he was busy probably terrorizing somebody else. And I hate to say that, and I don't wish that upon anyone. But the reality is he was no longer the tiger in my woods, but I kept him there. I kept that alive. So when I came to realize that I had been imprisoning myself, I knew that I needed to really, really do some deep work around that. And that showed up in many different ways for me. Lots of different ways. I read a lot of good books. I did a lot of soul searching. There was so many aspects of the healing journey that arose for me. At some point in the healing journey, I came to realize that he was a true blessing. I know that sounds kind of crazy, right? But he was. He was my twin flame that came into my life. We had this passion for each other, and then things just went terribly wrong. But he catapulted me because I was living in a state of self-loathing. Honestly, I didn't love myself when I met him. I didn't know how to care for myself. I didn't realize how beautiful I was as a being, as a spirit. I didn't realize my infinite possibilities. I was in complete darkness during those years. And so we believe in my truth around karma is that karma is not a punishment, but karma is a stage in which is set for us to learn some really important lessons. And when I look back at the molestations and the bullying, and I don't even know if I shared that I was raped in the beginning of this recording, but I'd had a date rape in my early 20s. And when I look back at those experiences, there was never any self-love for Carol in there. And those were the years where I was completely disconnected from spirit. And so I understand now that being disconnected from spirit is being disconnected from yourself. And so if you don't have any love for self, you are completely disconnected. And the karma, the setting up the stages, setting up the movie, if you want, the setting for me to learn those lessons were multiple during the years of my early childhood to my early adulthood. I was like, karma is just attracting the right people in the right circumstances for you to learn some really important lessons in life. And I know that sounds like bullshit when you're actually living in a current situation where it's abusive. I get that. But I'm reflecting back now and I'm understanding it from a very different perspective, from a very observer perspective. And I can do that on my own life. I can see it so clearly now. But trust me, I couldn't see it then. And so we set these stages. And so for me, that person was a twin flame. Twin flames are like, it's like this ignition of igniting passion and everything, and then it becomes really not healthy. And they're not meant to be our partners for life. They are meant to be in our lives for a short period of time so they can catapult us into where we're supposed to be going, where our soul's mission. They catapult us into that. That's what they're meant to do. And so when I look at myself and I see myself as being this disconnected spiritual person, completely severed from myself because I had no love for self, I was attracting and setting up the karmic stages for me to learn those lessons. And sometimes those lessons are really brutal. And it would be the case in my year in this relationship in common law where it was mentally abusive and eventually physically abusive, that was a big stage. And I wouldn't want to ever live through that again, ever again. But I look back at all of it and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to this person because I don't know where I would be today. Honestly, I certainly wouldn't be here talking about it. I certainly wouldn't be doing and sharing my gifts like I am today. No, I wouldn't be. He came into my life. He was my twin flame. He catapulted me into my spiritual journey. He pushed me to love myself. Totally did. And through the process of healing that trauma, it came in bits and pieces. And I remember being at a place where I was like, yeah, this is healed for me. This is done. I'm good with this. I no longer have any emotions around that trauma. And then Spirit brings you another opportunity to go deeper, peel another layer of that onion if you want, to go deeper into your healing journey. And this is really freaky. I mean, I couldn't make this up even if I tried. But when I was really beginning my spiritual practice and starting to do some spiritual counseling, and I had become certified in yoga, I was just really moving forward, I was given a referral, a gentleman who was having some major issues. He was having some pain at the crown of his head and some pain in his root chakra. He'd been doing lots of meditations with crystals. And he reached out to me because he just was seeing things. There was this whole other world that he wasn't even aware of, that non-ordinary world, and he was really scared and freaked out. But when he reached out to me, he was demanding. He wanted me to fix him. He was very adamant about it. His sound of his voice, his character triggered for me the past relationship that I'd had. And I thought, who is this person? And I remembered thinking, is it so-and-so who's like masking around being somebody else? Who is this person? And eventually I agreed to see him. There were some teachings that he needed to have in regards to the crystals he was working with. And I also believed that he had awoken the Kundalini without any preparation of his chakras. And so he was in a world that he didn't know how to navigate. But it became very clear to me that this person was very, very angry at life. And when I had agreed to see him, I knew all of the red bell whistles were going off, and it was like, this is just like so-and-so. And there was a bit of fear for me. Even though I had thought I had healed it all, I had a little bit of fear that had arisen. And so one of the messages I got from Spirit was, call on your power animals so you're protected, and make sure your husband is completely present during the whole time you're having this conversation with this person in your home. So he came. He knocked at the door. I opened the door, and oh my gosh, I couldn't make it up. He was identical to the man who I had had a horrible relationship with. He was the same height, had the same hair, had the same look in his eyes, was the same build, had the same voice. Honestly, it took me a few takes to make sure that I wasn't letting in the ex. It was bizarre. And anyways, I had him in the kitchen. My husband was present. I was sharing some teachings around the crystals and how to clear them and cleanse them. And then I wanted to send him off. There was nothing else I could do for him. And then at some point in the conversation, my husband turned around and looked at him and said, "Man, you carry a lot of anger. What is wrong with you? Honestly, dude, let it out." And the man turned around and looked at my husband and said, "You're right. I am angry." And he unleashed all of his traumas from his childhood. He shared all of the horrific things that were done to him. And as he's sharing, my heart just opened up wide, and I realized that he was simply a child who wanted to be loved, who wanted to be cared. That was his birthright, and he was denied that. And I realized that that was my ex as well. I knew a bit of his childhood stories, and I could see the spirit within this man was also the spirit within my ex. And I knew right there and then that this was only a young child who only ever wanted to be loved. In that moment, I was able to open my heart and bring complete compassion and love to this person. And when he was finished sharing his story, I had tears rolling down my cheeks, and I said to him, "You're just that little boy who wanted to be loved." And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Yes, that's all I ever wanted." We all cried. Yeah, it was a special moment. We all cried. We said our goodbyes, and to this day, I have no idea whatever came of him, but I certainly hope that the light and the love that I was able to shine on him helped him some way in life. Yeah. And then just when you think, okay, thank you, Spirit, for bringing me this person to help me understand the depths of the healing and the depths of the love and compassion. Because in the eyes of divine, there is no bad person or good person. There is no duality. And so therefore, maybe this lifetime I was the victim, but perhaps in another lifetime I was the abuser. Don't we both deserve compassion? Yeah, something to think about. But then many years later yet, I come across another situation, and this wasn't all that long ago. I was with a friend. I had taken her to an eye appointment, and she needed to be driven afterwards. And in the waiting room was this gentleman, this elderly gentleman with his son. And he was funny. He was talking up a storm, and it was quite entertaining. But I remember looking at him thinking, geez, you look familiar. Who are you? And then we happened to see him again at the next eye appointment a month later. And I'm still looking at him thinking, geez, I know you from somewhere. I know you. And then a month later, sure enough, both my friend and this person has an appointment on the same day. And this time when we were leaving, we met his wife. And when I met his wife, I knew, because I recognized her, these were the parents of my abuser in my life experience. Wow. I thought, what are the chances of this? And I thought to myself, wow, okay, Spirit, you're bringing me the parents. Why are you bringing me the parents? What more is there here that I'm supposed to heal from this trauma? And at some point, at another appointment, I had a conversation with both of them. And I said, are you so-and-so's parents? And they said, yes. How do you know that? I said, well, I lived with your son for a year. And they looked at me. They had no idea who I was. And they were just like, you could tell, confused. And I didn't ask how he was, but they shared with me that he was now living in a small town outside of Winnipeg, and he had married, and he had a little girl, and she was 8, and you could tell that they were proud of their grandchild. And I said, that's wonderful. That's great. And I remember there were no feelings around him at all, but I had some feelings around the parents. Because now that I have compassion for that young boy who would have been subjected to abuse, which he would have been, then there is forgiveness for the parents as well, isn't there? Yeah, there needs to be. And so that night I'd had a dream, and in the dream, it was a process. I don't remember the details of the dream, but I do remember that I met the ex in my dream. And I asked him how he was, and he told me he was happy. He told me that he loved his little girl, and I was happy for him. And then I had this dream, a separate one, that the little girl came to visit me, and she was showing me her drawing book. And she was showing me all kinds of pictures of her and her dad and her mom. She was telling me stories. And she appeared to be happy. And so I went, yes, I think we can finally close the chapter on this life's experience. Hikona haki shikini mina haku ra'itinina ushina etena ha sisa kononi na a bra ishikoni ina hatinina ho hinesa. When we walk through our healing journeys, there are many twists and turns in our paths, many hills and mountains to climb. And sometimes we just flow with the river, and there are no struggles at all. So this is my story of one of the biggest traumas that I learned from, that I experienced. I understand I played a part, and I understand that deeply the lesson for me was to learn to love myself. That truly was the lesson for me. I also understand those that I attracted along the way were mirroring my inner world of self-loathing, shame, and guilt. Yeah. And for all those who are listening that are currently living with an abuser, whether it be male or female, sometimes our children can be the abusers. I don't have any words for you. None at all. Because there are no words that can truly express. I cannot be in your shoes. No one can really know what you're living through. But what I can do, this is within my power, is to grow the light in my heart, fill myself up with abundance of love. And I can radiate that outwards to you through this message so that you can receive the light. Just take it in. So much love and compassion for all humanity, for all living sentient beings. I share with you that love. And I just hope that it's enough. For a moment or a second, just know that you are loved. Akri umene hishi ine inisisa aki nehita. I leave you with an empowerment song. I've sung it before, but this, feel it in your heart and take it in. Huna, huna, huna. Huna kuna sono. Blessings.